So let me introduce our first keynote speaker of this afternoon. Nell Watson is an engineering technologist. She's an entrepreneur, of course, and also a futurist thinker. She is the founder and CEO of Poikos, which is the smartphone 3D body measurement company. And she's here to give us an insight in what we can expect on the technological and entrepreneurial landscape in the coming decade, and also what we should aim for if we want to change the outcomes. Nell Watson, welcome.
Well, we're here to talk about the future. Sometimes when we're looking forward, it makes sense to look back as well. So let's rewind 10,000 years to Çatalhöyük in Turkey. This was the world's first settlement that we know of. And the people here settled for the first time in human history for a good reason: farming. They wanted to stay in the same place and work the land in order to generate food for themselves. But farming wasn't a better way of life. We know that it wasn't because we can look at their bones and we see that they are far worse nourished, and they lived extremely hard lives because they were trying to grind corn and stuff by hand. So it was a really difficult transition from hunter-gatherers who lived a life of leisure and really didn't work very hard at all compared to farmers. So why would they make that transition? Why was there a change from hunter-gatherer to farmer when the hunter-gathering life seemed so wonderful in comparison? It's a very curious question. Suppose I were to offer you a lottery ticket worth 1 million kroner, which had a 50% chance of either giving you the money or a 50% chance of nothing. Now, if I were to say, instead of giving you that lottery ticket with the 50-50 chance of everything or nothing, I would give you 500,000 kroner. Which would you choose? You would, of course, take the 500,000 kroner. It makes sense. But what if it was only 200,000, or 100,000, or 50,000, or nothing, potentially? Depending on your circumstances in life, having a sure bet of a smaller figure could actually be worth a lot more to you, having that security, than a chance at something big, but also a chance at nothing at all. If you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, that makes a big deal. And so the residents of Çatalhöyük, they made a rational decision that they were going to live kind of relatively impoverished in order to gather some security. And that security enabled them to invest in the future. It enabled them to use farming to create a division of labor. And from that, we have civilization as we know it. So the political classes, organized religion, great big government projects, all that kind of stuff. This is sometimes called a race to efficiency. It's where we have an accelerating positive feedback loop, where one element in an ecosystem will change the rules and do something different, and that forces all of the other elements to evolve at the same pace, or else they go extinct. We see it a lot in situations where there is a winner takes all. And it's sometimes known as a positional arms race. And literal arms races between nations follow the same pattern. One nation decides they're going to spend money on arms, and in order to keep a balance of power, other nations also have to spend the same. Now, in the end, nothing really changes on a relative scale, but on an absolute scale, everybody has had to invest resources, and everybody else is poorer off. There's a wonderful essay that I really recommend you check out. It's called Meditations on Moloch by Scott Alexander. And in it, he creates this idea of Moloch as a kind of a demon that is the reason why we can't have nice things, because of this race to efficiency, which is so often a race to the bottom that makes everybody overall worse off. And so over the last 10,000 years, the same principle of the race to efficiency has it has accelerated. It has caused us to accelerate our technological and social development. And we're seeing a convergence all over the world, and it's creating a kind of perfect storm, I believe. And one of the biggest drivers of that is actually automation. So over the last 10, 20 years, we've begun to see a greater and greater decoupling of wages and labor and productivity from capital. So it's made sense to invest in capital equipment rather than in people. That's creating a new industrial era. Think of farming. 200 years ago, the vast majority of the populace was involved in farming, and now it's down to about 2% of where it was. All of those jobs have disappeared. And all of the jobs, the last 2%, are going to go as well, thanks to advances in automation, automated tractors, automated mining. These are live in Chile, automated trucking, automated driving, automated cars for the domestic market as well. So we've seen a transition from replacing physical labor to replacing communication between a person and say like a bank teller. We've seen a replacement of the clerk in the shop who would give you a recommendation on what to buy. And we're now starting to see a replacement of pattern recognition, which is one of the hardest things for computers to crack. And we're finally at the point where it's possible. This means we can replace things like translators on the fly. And perhaps even the creative classes as well. Now, I doubt this robot can play half as well as Joshua Bell, but it's a lot more versatile. And traditionally, the creative classes have required a day job, something else that they did to pay the bills whilst they pursued their creativity. All of those jobs are going as well, at the bottom end of things, but also at the higher echelons as well, like medical radiographers, stockbrokers. In so many different areas, people are now being replaced by machines. And by machines, I don't necessarily mean robots. In fact, most of it is algorithms and intelligent agents. Things like Watson by IBM. We're starting to see a lot more of this, and we're starting to see these engines being capable of incredible stuff, like being able to put together wholly new articles of information, replacing journalists just by taking info from existing sources. This process is being accelerated again by another positive feedback loop. It's called the race to zero. Basically, the cost of cloud computing, processing, storage is dropping like a stone. And that's giving unfair advantages to companies that specialize in processing, that specialize in data, such as Google or Amazon. It means that companies like this are able to make the jump from being companies of data and tech directly into robotics. In his book 0 to 1, Peter Thiel talks about the importance of establishing a monopoly. And this is where we're heading again. The last great monopoly was Standard Oil. And they achieved this by being able to slash the costs of production and being able to create a kind of vertical integration between multiple different enterprises. Make no mistake, data is the new oil, particularly personal data. And what it means is that a certain segment of the populace is going to get a very big slice of the pie, and a lot of the populace are going to be left with very little, particularly those who have low skills, and even more so than low skills, they have low agility. They have a difficulty in adjusting to new circumstances. Now, it's possible to ride this wave in society into a good place. In Race Against the Machine, Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee talk about competing with machines rather than against them. What do we mean by that? Well, Brad Templeton, one of the consultants to the Google self-driving car, says that will know that a vehicle is truly autonomous when it decides to go to the beach without you. And so for a long time, we're going to have something called supervised autonomy. So we have kind of a buddy, a sidekick to play with who is an intelligent agent, but we are also ultimately in control. If you and your friend are out in the jungle and you're being chased by a tiger, you don't have to outrun the tiger, you just have to outrun your friend. So if you can learn to work with machines, you're going to be in a very good position. And in fact, a lot of work in our century is going to revolve around working very closely with machines, and people that have that skill are going to do very well. There is a new paradigm, and that's about agility. It's about organizations which are smaller, organizations which are distributed into small teams, and are able to capitalize on the efficiency of having small teams. For example, small teams of maybe 5 people that come together into a cluster of 25. It's about the size of a class in school, and then cluster together into maybe 125 or 150, kind of Dunbar's number, and no larger. If they grow any larger, then they should split, because this is the best way to achieve efficiency. There was a time when a baby startup would look kind of like this. Now it's much more likely to look like this. So we have somebody who has created something cool, hacked something together, tested it out in the public, and taken it forward from there. And a lot of business is kind of like looking in the rearview mirror. It's analyzing a situation and choosing from a menu of options what somebody should have done or what they shouldn't have. But engineering is different. Engineering is not about analyzing problems, it's about finding the problems. And so if you're able to just dig in and move forward, you're in a really good position. It's something called the hands-on imperative. And it's a really big deal for employment over the next 10 years or so. Google, for example, they're not looking for specialists. They're not looking for really smart people that specialize in one area. They're looking for people who can learn, people who have generalizable skills and really want to apply them. The Finnish philosopher Pekka Himinen talks about changes from the Protestant work ethic towards the hacker ethic. Hacker ethic is all about creating something out of nothing. It's about valuing people's contributions, whoever they are. And it's about free flow of information and about basically just getting stuff done. And it appeals to people who are very high in productivity. In fact, if you have a good engineer, they might be 20 times more effective in their role than an average engineer. Companies like Netflix are aware of this. Sheryl Sandberg, for example, declared the Netflix culture document to be the most important document to come out of Silicon Valley. And it's about 150 slides, but I'll boil it down. B players kill agile cultures. As soon as somebody comes in who's not fully pulling their weight, everything starts to fall apart. And the B players hire C players, and pretty soon people start doing silly things. And then you have to have rules. And once you have rules, the A players get really fed up, and then pretty soon you're left with an organization that's very unagile. And we need people with hustle. Now, we're in a room full of people of incredible hustling ability, being from such wonderful entrepreneurial backgrounds. But I wonder if you've ever thought about hustle in other places. In his book, The Stealth of Nations, Senior TED Fellow Robert Neuwirth talks about a class of people around the world who don't have a formal job. Instead, they kind of do a little bit of this, they do a little bit of that. They make money however they can, and they survive day to day. And he calls them débrouillards. It comes from colonial French. And these débrouillards, they maybe sell a little fruit at the side of the road. They don't have a formal role at any job, and yet they hustle to live and they hustle to survive. And at the moment, about 1/2 of the world's population has a job, and about another half, they hustle for a living. The thing is that that's increasing from 1/2 to 2/3 by the end of this decade. We're seeing a wave of entrepreneurship, but kind of at the bottom of the pyramid. And a lot of that is considered legitimate, and a lot of it is considered illegitimate, like selling drugs. In the US, for example, with its $18 trillion GDP, about $2 trillion is considered to come from underground markets. And that's doubled since the financial crisis. So it's a huge wave of people that are kind of living black. They're not paying taxes, they're not declaring their income, and it's considered now a way of life. Globally, if all of these débrouillards were a nation, they would have a GDP of about $10 trillion. That's the same as China. There is a virtual superpower around the world. And they are indeed a powerful group. For example, Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia, on the left. On the right, we have Deng Xiaoping in China. Both of them débrouillards. Mohamed Bouazizi, a fruit seller, Deng Xiaoping also. Both of them suffered at the hands of their local governments. And in both cases, people got very angry. They got angry at the injustice and they decided to fight back. In Tunisia, in the Arab Spring, also in China. You don't want to mess with these people because they are very inventive and they tend to stick together. In the Indian subcontinent, they have a term for being able to just put something together and have it work. It's called yugad. For example, this truck was actually hand-built, not by a sophisticated engineer, but just using old bits of scrap. But it works. And the interesting thing is that this kind of culture that lives in this way is basically the same as hacker culture. Débrouillardise and hacker culture are the same. The only difference is that hacker culture is kind of intellectual. Débrouillardise is just a way of surviving. But the principles are the same. And we see a collision of worlds between the hackers and the hustlers, and no more so greater than in Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize that Bitcoin was created for philosophical reasons. The origin of Bitcoin lies in an economic philosophy called agorism, created back in the 80s by a guy called Samuel Edward Konkin III. Basically, agorism has a different set of moral values than we traditionally have in our society. But basically, agorists see hustlers, whether they're selling something legitimate, black market, gray market, white market, whatever, they see them as a kind of a release valve against economic tyranny. They see the hustler as hero. Now, over the last couple of days, we've seen over 400 hidden websites in the darknet being taken down. And these websites are things kind of like Silk Road 2.0, where people are trading bitcoins for drugs and all kinds of stuff. But it's not going to go away. Tor, the dark web technologies that they use, may have some flaws in it, but it will be replaced by something else. Something I'm very curious about is called homomorphic crypto. It's basically if you have two objects and they have shadows, and the shadows interfere with each other and another pattern comes out, that's kind of how it works. It's very much in the research stages, but it's going to change the whole nature of cryptography over the next couple of years. Keep an eye out for it. Further down the line, computational ethics are going to make it a lot easier to analyze a contract using machine in order to work out whether breaches have occurred. And this is important because 20% of GDP in developed nations is all about stuff related to trust. So escrow and banking and that sort of thing. And all of it is subject to disruption from cryptocurrencies. Today, cryptocurrencies are largely used by Western hackers, and almost all of them male and stuff like that. But it's going to change. It's going to change very quickly. We're going to see an adoption of these currencies by more of the kind of the débrouillards all around the world. And technology can change how we view the world as well. Some of you might remember when Napster came out around 1999, and it changed the way that we tend to think about copyright. It kind of became okay to, rip off a song or whatever. People began to accept it, and it was led by technology itself. The interesting thing about cryptocurrencies is that they have a fixed rate of inflation, which means that if people adopt cryptocurrencies in a big way, inflation becomes impossible. Inflation is basically just printing money, which is what these guys do, but about 1 million times faster. The most extraordinary thing I find about preventing inflation is that, in theory, it could stop all war. That's an extraordinary thing to say, but war is only possible if you can inflate currency like crazy and defer the spending for years and years down the line. So if inflation becomes impossible, we may see a very, very different world. Now, back in the 50s, there were predictions that we would end up working just 4 hours a week. And that never came to be, unfortunately. But people at the time were looking at how working hours had changed from 16 hours on average to 12 hours, and how automation was increasing. And they reckoned that automation would basically make work in itself kind of obsolete. A few things changed that course, one of which was the two-income trap, where basically a lot of women entered the workforce, and then that kind of dropped the value of labor, and then it made that everybody had to have a two-income family in order to get by. Again, similar to this Moloch problem, where everybody ends up overall worse off. But we still have the legacy of the 40-hour week from the industrial era. And having more cash than time, it changes the way that we think about time. We think of our time as being very precious, so we want to make the most of it. We want to just veg out at the end of the week. And it makes us want stuff. That 40-hour week makes us consume. And in order for the economy to be healthy, people have to be a little bit unhealthy, which I think is really unfortunate. We're starting to see some changes. Companies like Treehouse are moving to a 4-day week, and they still seem to be doing extremely well. Something called Parkinson's Law states that basically however long you have to do something is probably the time that you'll take to do it. And I hope I'm not going over time yet, am I? I am. Okay, well, in which case, let me finish up. There is a trap. In order for people to work less hours, they need to be able to get a job at all. And unfortunately, that's sometimes a bit of a problem. For example, in Sweden, here, it's 2 times harder to get an interview with a non-Swedish name. And youth have a 4 times higher youth unemployment rate. And this is a really big problem, because if you don't get experience as a young person, you cannot prove your value, you cannot add to your value, and then you miss the boat. And then you're stuck. And this may be why in the US, for example, 40% of youth simply have given up, and they do not want a job anymore. And I think that events last year in Husby are related to this, and that it might be a taste of what things are to come. So, what should come next? Well, I think that there are tremendous opportunity costs in education. We send kids to school for 12 years, and they come out of it with very little economic value. You can't just leave school and go and get a job. You have to go and go and do something else, like going and getting an education. And I think that the premium is not going to be on skills in the future. It's going to be about what people have done. So having a piece of paper that says you have studied something to a certain level is great. But I think that being able to build something, being able to create something new out of nothing is going to be the key skill of the 21st century. If we think about it, if you're able to program a computer or a 3D printer, it's kind of like having an Aladdin's lamp. You can just rub and make whatever you want happen. And I think that goes very well with entrepreneurship. It may be that's why some of the most entrepreneurial careers are based around technology. We need to learn how to teach ourselves, because in a very changing world, our roles and the skills that we've learned are going to quickly become obsolete. We need to be able to move beyond that and to just dive in and acquire skills. I think one of the most interesting areas in education is a company called Minerva, and they have basically the premise is to teach people how to think. And they move people around country to country every semester, and they seem to be doing pretty well. Remember when I said about hustlers, the débrouillards, being all around the world? I think we need to be looking for talent in unconventional places. We need to be looking for talent in places we're not expecting to find it and cultivating it. And there's a good reason for that, which I'll just close on. The ancient Greeks had a concept of something called eudaimonia. It means human flourishing, or turning into the biggest, bestest kind of person that you can be. And different philosophers had different ideas about it. But Aristotle reckoned that the way to promote human flourishing was to have a balance between action and good feeling. So that's being able to enjoy time with your friends, but also have meaningful work. As entrepreneurs, all of you know what it feels like to be able to do meaningful work and with amazing peers. And I would like you to think about how you can share that joy of entrepreneurship with others. That's how we have peace and freedom for everyone out of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just stay on stage for just a second. You will come back in the discussion and you can ask questions. I will just ask you one question. You started with Sheryl Sandberg on what would you do if you were not afraid? But if you're like me, you're a bit, middle-aged, you are kind of entrepreneurial spirit, but you're still a bit afraid when you see this technological development. What would be your advice?
My advice would be to head down to your local maker fair, learn to code, learn to build something.
Learn to code?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm too old for learning to code.
Nonsense. You can go to Code Academy or any of the other similar services out there and just go and pick it up.
So I have to dive into this technological stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You don't have to dive. You can just put in a toe at first, but make an attempt and take it from there.
Thank you very much for this advice. Thank you, Nell Watson. She will be back in just a minute.